Welcome to another edition of Farming in Ohio. Today we're going to talk about two topics that are frequently asked to Ohio State University Extension professionals. One is the Ohio sales tax exemption for agricultural purchases, and the other one is the current agricultural use valuation, or CAUV, on agricultural land. Hello, Chris Bruynis with Ohio State University Extension in Ross County, and today we're going to discuss the sales tax exemption. It's one of the most common questions that I get as an extension educator with Ohio State University, and people always call and said, am I eligible to claim the sales tax exemption? So let's go through the rules of that a little bit, and then let's talk about some of the places where we can and we cannot claim that sales tax exemption. I always like to start with a little humor when I start talking about taxes, because it's such a difficult topic to talk about. And so I like this little cartoon, and it says, none of this makes any sense. It's almost as if they don't want me to understand. And then the other person says, maybe that's why they call it the tax code. And so taxes can be confusing. And so let's just think about this rule for Ohio farmers, and what do we do when we want to claim the Ohio sales tax exemption? Well, to be able to claim it, there's some things that we need to meet as an agricultural business. And so they define agriculture with the four different subheadings, if you will. One would be farming. And they define farming as the occupation of tilling the soil. And they define agriculture as the cultivation of soil and animal husbandry. So that kind of opens it up. So we have livestock involved. We have anything we're growing plant-wise involved. And then they wanted to further that and say horticulture, again, production of flowers, fruits, herbs, vegetables, sod, mushrooms, and nursery stock. So that's about anything else we're going to grow in soil is included in this definition of farming. And then the last one is floriculture, which I thought was already covered in horticulture. But again, the production of flowers and plants, and whether that be out in the field or in a greenhouse situation. So anything we're going to grow, and then any livestock that's considered agriculture. And we'll get into those definitions a little further. And so to me, if I think about this, farming defined might be an easier definition if we would just say that it's an agricultural business or a business that produces agricultural products. And then to qualify, there's two conditions that need to be met for a business to qualify for the agricultural sales tax exemption. One is there needs to be a production component, so we need to be producing something. And then there needs to be a business component. And so I think the business component is the most overlooked. As we think about it, we have to be in the business of farming. And so that really rules out all of the hobby farms, all of the families that are taking a 4-H project or an FFA project, and they want to go buy feed or whatever for that animal. And they say, are you sales tax exempt? It's really easy to say yes. And the business that's providing that thing you're buying will accept that answer. The challenge is if the Ohio Department of Taxation ever wants to challenge that yes answer, and I don't have a business component, the liability or the responsibility goes back onto the person that's purchasing the product. So it doesn't fall on the retailer that's selling you whatever. And so for them, it's an easy, okay, you're tax exempt, sign this form, off you go. I think we need to be a little more judicious in terms of, am I in a business of farming? And so let's talk a little bit more about the production component. And again, we have to be engaged in agricultural production activities. And again, we talked about earlier tilling the soil. So what are those things that we might grow in soil? And again, whether it's soil that's here on the earth, or man-made soil, or soilless soil, if you will. Crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, potatoes, just trying to think of some hay that are grown here locally. And then producing vegetables or fruits, and so all of your vegetable crops, all your fruit crops, flowers, herbs, sod, mushrooms, nursery stock. We had that list earlier, but just to reiterate, about anything we're going to grow that we can sell will qualify. And then on the livestock side, I just have some examples up here, but they have raising livestock in the Ohio Revised Code, and then they go on, they specifically mention cattle, poultry, or bees, but it does not exclude sheep and goats and the other livestock that we typically raise on a farm. I'm not sure that I think market rabbits would even qualify. So if you think about all the things that we grow that we could sell for consumption, it would qualify on that production component. The business component is a little bit more tricky. I'm going to go down to the third bullet and start with that and then move my way back up. But proof of a for-profit operation would be filing a federal Schedule F. And so if we think about, that's our farm tax schedule that we file. If we're not filing a Schedule F, a colleague of mine actually reached out to the Ohio Department of Taxation and asked the question, is a Schedule F required to be able to claim the agricultural sales tax exemption? And the answer was yes. And so if we're not filing a Schedule F, we should not be claiming the agricultural sales tax exemption. So if we don't have that business component, then we don't need to do this. But if we move up, a business is any activity with the object of gain. And so if we have a business plan, we've done all the things, we're trying to do this for a profit, but we don't have a profit this year, does that mean I don't qualify? No, it does not. It just means there's an intent of profit. And so we all know that farming is a risky business. And if we do make a profit, great. Some years we do not, but we're not going to be in the business long term if we don't make a profit. And so there has to be that profit motive. And so that for-profit is a requirement. If I'm a landowner and I'm leasing my farm, or I'm farming with somebody else and I'm filing a federal Form 4835, which is farm rental income and expenses, that does not meet the requirement for the Ohio Department of Taxation to be eligible for the Ohio sales tax exemption. So this is what the form looks like on the right-hand side of the page. It's just a sales and use tax blanket exemption certificate, and they also have a single exemption, a single-use exemption certificate. So if it's a retailer that I'm going to be buying from frequently, I want to do the blanket, they'll keep it on file. These are available if you want to go online to the Ohio Department of Taxation. You can print these off, fill it out, take it to your retailer, and they'll keep that on file. The state of Ohio does not issue a sales tax exemption number. That's another question I frequently get, is how do I find my sales tax exemption number? There isn't a number, and so if I have a vendor's license or a farm ID, anything like that is not going to be your sales tax exemption number, nor is your Social Security number going to be your sales tax exemption number. It's simply filling out this form and putting agricultural use in the box for the reason for the exemption, and then with your name and address and information there, and that's all it is. It's a very simple form as far as that goes. And so let's talk about, if I qualify, what can I buy then that's sales tax exempt? And so we're going to have some things we need to define in here, but anything used or consumed in the production of a tangible personal property. And so when we think about crops, fertilizer, chemicals, they're all going to be used up in the production of those crops. Livestock, it can be feed, it can be, well, even our equipment is tangible personal property because it is consumed. Equipment doesn't last forever. So tractors and tillage tools and feeders for livestock. And so anything that's going to have a a useful life, we're going to be able to depreciate that on our tax return, would be considered consumed in the production of whatever it is we're raising to sell. Secondly, materials and parts that are incorporated into personal property would also. And so when we start thinking about what's getting incorporated, I'll give a horticultural example. I am going to sell plants, and they're going to be potted in baskets. I'm buying those baskets to reuse. They're getting incorporated into that plant that I'm selling. That would be sales tax exempt. Materials used and parts used in conditioning or holding of products produced. And so again, our coolers, our sorters, anything like that that's going to be used, head gates for livestock in terms of using that. But there is one exception to those materials, and that is if we're going to incorporate those materials into real property. And when we start thinking about real property, something that gets added to your property tax bill. So if I'm building a new building, that's real property. So if I'm buying materials and I'm going to replace the roof on a barn, that is not sales tax exempt because that's getting incorporated into real property. There is an exception to the exception. When we said except for things getting incorporated into real property, the only exception in the Ohio Revised Code is if it is sales to a person engaged in the business of horticulture. And again, go back to the earlier definition of what's horticulture. That's the raising of fruits, vegetables, and plants for sale. If we're incorporating that into a horticultural structure, then they can be tax exempt, and that would be things like repairs to a greenhouse, fans, heaters in that greenhouse. Even though we're incorporating that into that greenhouse structure, they would be sales tax exempt. And that's the only exception when we're buying something that gets incorporated into real property. Packaging. If we're starting to think about retail sales, so if we're going to move a little bit away from producing commodities, corn, livestock, and we're going to sell them as a wholesaler, if you will. Now we're going to get into the retail side of things. Any packaging that I buy, and again, that can be any material, including labels and parts for packages, that is sales tax exempt. Machinery and equipment used in packaging is also sales tax exempt. Packages, again, let's define packages or packaging. That could be anything: bags, baskets, cartons, crates, boxes, cans, bottles, bindings, wrappings. Anything that would contain something would be considered packaging, and we would not have to pay Ohio sales tax when purchasing those. Marketing expenses. If we're in that retail side again, anything that we're going to do that's helping us to sell our product. And so print material, if we're going to go to a printer and have some flyers or coupons, gift certificates, any kind of advertising material that prices and describes tangible personal property would be tax exempt from Ohio sales tax. The technology that we're using in our retail trade or business, and so that can do everything. If we have a business phone, be our telephone, any computers, fax machines. Of course, fax machines are about obsolete now, but they're still on the list with the Ohio Department of Taxation. And similar personal property that are used to accept orders for direct marketing retail sales are tax exempt. And this is another question that I get frequently. Vehicles that can be run on the road will be taxed. ATVs and UTVs are one that you go back when I was a child, which is a long time ago now. People bought a lot of these and claimed Ohio sales tax exemption on them because they had a farm. But the Ohio Department of Taxation has since said, no, we're going to charge tax on those. They can be run on the road. I had a farmer call me here a few years ago, and they had migrant labor, and they had a vegetable farm, and they bought an old school bus, and they were just using that bus to haul migrant laborers to the fields and back to their lodging area. And they wanted to know if that could be tax exempt. And we run that one. We asked Ohio Department of Taxation, and this was their comment that any vehicle that can be run on the road will be taxed. So they did have to pay the sales tax on the purchase of that old school bus. ATVs, UTVs, even if they're not licensed, even if they don't have the turn signals for the road, they have the potential to be used on the road, and they're requiring taxes to be collected on those. So if you have questions, we can email those questions to me at bruynis.1@osu.edu. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the CAUV, or the Current Agricultural Use Valuation here in Ohio. It is a tax break, if you will, for land that is being used as agricultural production land. And so let's define what agricultural land is. For the property tax purposes, again, this is a property tax deduction. Farmland devoted exclusively to commercial agriculture may be valued according to its current use rather than its highest and best potential use. And I know that current use probably irritates some people that are farming versus highest and best, because they feel it's already at its highest and best use. But this was really started back in 1975 when there was some developmental pressures on lands that were surrounding larger cities, and those developmental pressures haven't gone away. But if a farm sold next door to mine for development, and maybe it sold for 3 times what I would sell it for if somebody was going to farm it, all of a sudden my tax valuation went up to what that neighboring farm sold for. And so this was really designed to reduce the tax values approximately 50% from the then current taxes in 1975. And there's a formula, and again, that formula was tweaked in 2017, but this formula, it didn't change too much, but they just made some minor tweaks to it. But the value is going to be a formula, crop yield, and what had happened over time, the reason we needed to tweak that formula, back in 1975, our average crop yield for corn and soybeans and wheat in the state of Ohio was much less than it was today due to better farming practices, better genetics, and so our yields are much improved. And times the average crop price, and again, crop prices are not the same as they were in 1975. Back then we were happy to get $2 corn, and then we got into a period where $4.50 corn, and right now we're up pushing $7 corn. So that income off of that property grew significantly. And then we took off our non-land production costs, which would be our seed, our fertilizer, our chemicals. And so we were able to deduct those off, and then we divided that by a capitalization rate. And just think of that as an interest rate. And so what we know happened in 1975, interest rates were probably in that 4, 5, 6%. That was pretty typical. And for the last several years, the interest rates have been clear down to 1% or less. And so, you know, you have a bigger top number, a smaller bottom number, and so that value just blew up. And so it was designed to be 50% of the current property tax value. In some instances, in some counties, it grew to almost the same as if it didn't exist. And this is really just think of the colors again. The average in 2019 was 31% of the, so it actually over adjusted a little bit. I think that's going to correct itself with our current higher prices. I think that this will be creeping back up into that 50-55% range, but it happens slowly because there's reevaluations every 3 years. And so let's look at what it did over time, the history of CAUV from 2003 to 2021. Again, we started down there $161, and it got all the way up to almost $1,400 by 2015, and that was really due to a run-up in crop prices in that 2011, 12, 13 time frame, and that really got captured. And so that was a surprise to many farmers. My own family farm that my father has, taxes went all the way up to $24,000 on that farm, and they have now adjusted back down to a little over $9,000. And so it was quite a significant change. And prior to that run up, we were probably in that $5,000, $6,000 range. And so it really was a hardship for farmers, because the problem that happened is in 2015 and 16, crop prices had come back down. But since this is evaluated once every 3 years on a 7-year historical price of the high and the low being thrown out, so it's a 5-year that's incorporated, so it's a 7-year Olympic average, we were now having higher land taxes with lower incomes. And so it was really a struggle for many farm families. So to qualify, again, if you own land, how do I qualify for current agricultural use value? It must meet one of the following requirements for the 3 years preceding an application. And so we need to have 10 or more acres devoted exclusively to commercial agriculture. And so if we have 11 acres, because I'll have a slide later, they're going to subtract out 1 acre with a homestead. Unless there's no buildings on it, then it can be just 10 acres. And so if I have 10 acres I can qualify for that, for those 10 or more acres. If I have less than 10 acres and I'm still devoting it exclusively to commercial agricultural use, then we need to produce an average gross income. That's not a net income, that's just all of my cash receipts without expenses taken off, of at least $2,500. And so, to me, I start thinking about whether we have a small vineyard or whether we have vegetable production and we're selling truck crops. This $2,500 isn't hard to meet, and with today's corn and soybean prices, I think we can meet that easily just with corn and soybean production. And so again, what's happening on that land? If we're mowing it, I know a lot of land around the county that people are, I don't want to mow it with my lawnmower, so I let the neighbor come in and make hay off of it. We're not fertilizing it, we're really not doing anything with it. We're probably not generating $2,500 worth of value, and therefore not qualifying for this property tax reduction. Anyway, we need to file our application with the county auditor annually. So if you miss a year, it's going to be a 3-year time of documenting before you're going to be eligible, unless you can go in and have a really good story. My dad, one year, I have to laugh, he paid, we have 7 tax bills that come on the farm, and he paid one of them thinking he paid them all, and then the other 6 were in delinquency. Anyway, we were able to go in and argue. My mom was in the hospital at the time and passed away, and they accepted that as a reason. I mean, he had tried to pay it, but just didn't get it accomplished right. So there are situations, each county auditor's office will be different, but again, they understand that humans make mistakes, which I think is a good thing. So again, let's talk about commercial agriculture, a very similar definition to what we had earlier when we were talking about the Ohio sales tax exemption. Commodity crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, hay, permanent pasture. Again, if we're grazing livestock, the value of that livestock will qualify. And then the whole nursery stocks, vegetables, flowers, and conservation programs and practices do qualify. So if we have the farm in CRP or something along those lines, and the payments on that is above the $2,500, then we do qualify there as well. There are additional categories that they're going to subtract out for, and again, they're not going to value as agricultural use. Home sites, they're going to take 1 acre for that. Roads, wasteland, ponds, if we're using it for agritourism, biofuel production, non-commercial woodland, again, if it's contiguous to the 10 acres, it can be claimed And then commercial timberland, there is a timber tax or a timber designation we can get on those lands that gives us a reduction as well for that. So we start thinking about, how do I qualify? Again, own 10 acres or more, 11 acres if we have a home on the property. We have $2,500 in gross revenue if we have less than 10 acres. Now, if we have 10 acres or more, we don't need to meet the $2,500 gross revenue requirement. That's only if we have less than 10 acres. We need to do the annual application. There is a $25 fee associated with that annual application. And when I looked this up for this presentation, currently across the state of Ohio, CAUV ground that has that designation is sitting about 33% of non-CAUV valuations. So the ground that's not enrolled in CAUV, that would be similar, vacant ground, if you will, non-developed ground, we're about a third. Now, I think with current crop prices, that's going to adjust itself. And interestingly, when you go back to that formula, it doesn't look at other industries. It doesn't look at horticultural prices. It doesn't look at livestock prices. It simply looks at corn, soybean, wheat, and oat prices. And we don't grow many oats in the state of Ohio anymore. And wheat has been declining for a number of years. But that formula was set back in 1975. That part didn't get tweaked in 2017. And so, you know, even though you say I'm not growing any corn, soybeans, or wheat on my property, that's still going to be the litmus test, if you will, on how we measure that. Again, let's think about questions coming in on either one of these topics, agricultural sales tax exemption, or whether I'm qualifying for current agricultural use value. I'm happy to entertain those. Just shoot me an email, and that would be bruynis.1@osu.edu, and that's BRUYNIS, I know unique spelling of the last name, .1@osu.edu. I look forward to your questions.